Thank you. We are on the record in State versus Derek Charles Hall. 2 warrants. The first is 20 W14310 robbery and 20 W14311 family violence battery. Mr. Hall is present in custody, represented by Mr. Lawrence Lewis. We are doing this by video due to the COVID judicial emergency. The state has 1 witness. It is Officer Montgomery. If you could please raise your right hand. Do you solemnly swear or affirm that the testimony you shall give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
Please lower your hand and state your name.
Officer Bradley Montgomery.
Where do you work?
Gwinnett County Police Department.
How long have you been there?
About 2.5 years.
All right, and are you post-certified?
Yes, I am.
And were you post-certified at all times related to this case?
Yes, ma'am.
What was your role in this case, Officer Montgomery?
The primary officer.
What did you do?
I cleared with other officers on October 12th around 10:40 for a person stabbed call at the in-town suites on 3720 Steve Reynolds Boulevard for room 238. I was the 3rd officer to arrive. Dispatch gave us the description of the suspect, black male with a black shirt, black pants, and black shoes. Officer Lee and Officer Dixon were there at the scene first and located the suspect, the master description. Our dispatch said Mr. Waters, the victim, was being chased around the outside of the hotel by Mr. Hall with a knife. But when Officer Lee and Officer Dixon approached Mr. Hall, he identified himself and said he was at room 238. So we did place handcuffs on him and conducted a pat down just to make sure he no longer had any weapons on him. And then I located the victim, Mr. Waters, near the entrance of the hotel. So each party was separated, and I first spoke with Mr. Waters to find out what happened. And while speaking with him, he did have a large cut that was still bleeding on the left side of his neck. So I called a med unit to come just to make sure he was okay and to bandage up the wound. So while talking to Mr. Waters, he stated that he allowed Mr. Hall, who was homeless at a few days before he met him, to live and stay at his hotel room 238. So that night, October 12th, they were having a verbal argument about the rent money Mr. Hall was paying Mr. Waters. Mr. Hall thought it was an unreasonable amount, and he wanted a refund and to get his money back. But Mr. Waters wouldn't give his money back, so they got into a verbal argument. Mr. Waters stated he was standing in the kitchen, and Mr. Hall was standing in this living room area inside the hotel room. And Mr. Waters stated that since he wouldn't give the rent money back to Mr. Hall came over to Mr. Waters in the kitchen, grabbed the chain off his neck, which caused the mark on the left side of his neck. And he said, Mr. Hall stated that if you give me the rent money back, I'll give you your chain back. But Mr. Waters still wouldn't, so he said Mr. Hall grabbed the knife off the kitchen counter and chased him out of the hotel room. So then, since
Wait.
Hall...
Wait. Okay, I want to back up just a little bit, okay? You're doing great, okay. So on October 12th, about 10:40 p.m., you and some others get dispatched for a person stabbed call. Is that right?
Yes.
And you went to in-town suites?
Yes, 3720 Steve Reynolds.
And Steve Reynolds. And what county was that?
Gwinnett County.
All right. And when you got there, did you actually see anyone being chased around by a knife? Or chased around when you got there?
When I got there, there was no knife in possession of Mr. Hall.
Where was everybody when you got on scene? I know you said you were the 3rd officer. Where was everybody? What did you see?
I saw Officer Lee and Officer Dixon with Mr. Hall with his hands behind his back with handcuffs on.
Got it.
After they conducted the pat down just to make sure he no longer had any weapons on him.
Okay.
Because at the time, dispatch told us he had a knife.
Got it. Okay. And so did you actually ever look inside room 238?
Yes, after I questioned Mr. Hall and Mr. Waters, we did have permission by Mr. Hall and Mr. Waters to check the room. We did see a knife in the hotel room. It was a large butcher knife.
Not?
We did, but it did not have any blood on it, and there was no blood spatter inside the room.
Well, and nobody was claiming to be stabbed, right?
Mr. Waters said he was stabbed on the left side of his neck, but the injuries were consistent with the chain being ripped off his neck. So the chain scratched the left side of his neck when it was being taken off him.
When you were talking earlier about the argument, you said the victim was in the kitchen, the defendant was in the living room area?
Yes.
Is this a one-room kind of like studio efficiency, or are there walls blocking off these different areas?
It's kind of like a studio hotel room.
Okay.
So it's just one big room.
All right. Did either of them appear to be under the influence at all?
No, ma'am.
So Mr. Waters said that they were arguing about rent. The defendant wanted some money back. So he came over to Mr. Waters and just yanked the chain like off his neck?
Yes, yanked it off his neck.
And the force of the yank is what caused this bleeding cut?
The bleeding cut on the left side of his neck.
Okay, did you question the victim about, hey, were you stabbed, or was it the necklace coming off, or were things happening too fast, or what's up?
He said it could have been from the being caused by the yanking of the chain, but he did say Mr. Waters did grab a knife. So in the situation, he said he could have been the chain, but he thought he was stabbed.
At the time where the defendant came towards the victim in the kitchen, did the defendant, Mr. Hall, have a knife at that time?
No. After he yanked the chain off his neck, that's when Mr. Waters said he grabbed a knife to try and go after him. Okay, so who was chasing who? Mr. Hall was chasing Mr. Waters.
And who had the knife?
Mr. Waters said Mr. Hall had the knife.
Okay. I'm sorry, I was just confused with the pronouns. Okay. Do you see the defendant anywhere?
Yes, I do.
And can you identify him, please?
Yes, he's wearing the blue mask and green jumpsuit.
Let the record reflect the witness has identified Mr. Hall. Anything else you'd like to add, Officer Montgomery?
After reading Mr. Hall his Miranda rights, he did say he wanted to speak to us. He did say the verbal argument was about the rent money because he thought Mr. Waters was being fair with the amount of money he was having to pay him. So he stated that he did take the chain from Mr. Waters, but he said he just saw the chain on the counter and threw it on the ground. That's how the chain got damaged, and was unsure how Mr. Waters got any type of injuries on his neck. It wouldn't explain anything about the physical altercation. He just said he felt he was being cheated about the amount of money he was being paid.
Did you physically look at the injury on Mr. Waters' neck?
I did.
Could you tell in your training and experience whether it appeared to be fresh or healed or scabbed over?
It was a fresh wound. When I first spoke with him, it was still bleeding.
Could you tell, and I know you're not a doctor or medical professional, but in your training and experience, did it look consistent or inconsistent with somebody like yanking a chain off someone's neck?
Yes, it was consistent with something being scratched across your neck. I've been to many stabbing calls. It's not a deep cut like it would be with a large butcher knife. It wasn't a deep cut, no like chunks of his neck missing, anything like that. It was just abrasion across his neck from a chain being yanked off your neck. And
for chain, I'm assuming we're talking like a chain link necklace?
Yes, it was there were big chains, big chain links across the necklace.
Okay. Thank you very much, Officer Montgomery. Those are all the questions that I have, but Mr. Lewis may have some for you, okay?
Okay.
Officer Montgomery, did you find the chain?
Yes, it was in Mr. Hall's pocket.
In Mr. Hall's pocket. Okay.
Yeah. When we were patting him down, we felt things inside of his pocket. We asked him if we could take it out. He said yes, and the chain was in his pocket.
Okay, then who did he tell you that chain belonged to?
He said it belonged to Mr. Waters, I believe.
Okay, all right, good. Let me ask this. Mr. Waters is staying at the in-town suites when he notices that my client is homeless. Is that right?
Yes, he stated he saw Mr. Hall in the area and told Mr. Hall that he could stay with him at this hotel room.
Okay, you can stay with me. Now, I don't know if anybody else has any sense of the timeline, but I certainly don't have any sense. How many hours or days go by after Mr. Waters agrees to let Mr. Hall stay at the in-town suites with him?
I don't have a timeline when Mr. Hall was homeless to the time he was allowed to stay. I don't have that exact timeline.
My question is more, when Mr. Hall stepped through the door and handed Mr. Waters some money, how many hours or days went by from that point to the point where my client asked to have his money back?
And for my recollection, I believe it was 3 to 5 days.
Okay, 3 to 5 days. And do you know how much money was at issue?
I can't recall.
Okay, so my client gave him some money, said, hey, okay, I'll stay here with you. I'm assuming since he's homeless, he didn't have much stuff. Is that fair to say?
I believe so, yes.
Yeah, and maybe a better question is, when you stopped Mr. Hall, he didn't have a bunch of property on him. Is that fair to say?
When I made contact with him, he didn't.
That's correct. And at no point in time when somebody was transporting Mr. Hall did you have to load up the trunk of the police vehicle with a bunch of his other property. Is that fair to say?
Yes, sir. He just said he all he had in his possession was a backpack.
Okay, good. Were there any cameras located at the in-town suites which would have caught my client chasing Mr. Waters?
Not that are still working.
Okay.
Many of the cameras at that hotel don't work.
Okay. Was there any eyewitness that said they saw my client chasing Mr. Waters at any time?
Not that we could find at that time. That would speak with us.
Okay. And if I understand you correctly, there was no blood inside of the studio there at the in-town suites. Is that right?
That would come from being cut with a knife. No, not blood spatter like that.
Okay, and I'm trying to understand in-town suites. You described it as one large room. So as we entered the room at the in-town suites where this allegedly took place, I'm assuming there's a bathroom which has its own door. Is there a separate bedroom area, or are the beds and the TV and the living area all in one area?
So there's a bedroom area connected to the kitchen, so that area is just all open, and there's a small bathroom with a toilet that has a separate door inside.
Okay,
so that's the only other door inside the room.
Okay, good. So when you enter the room, when you enter the hotel room, the only other door there might be for the closet and for the bathroom. Is that right?
Yes, sir.
Okay. When you approached my client, you indicated that he didn't appear to be under the influence of any drugs or alcohol. Is that right?
No, sir.
Okay, and he wasn't resisting at all, was he?
No, he didn't resist.
Okay, and his story, which was, I'm hoping was caught on body cam. Was your body cam working?
Yes, it was working at the time, and everybody on scene had one on them and was recording.
Okay, that just means I gotta watch 5 body cams now. Okay, but the story that my client told you was he was staying there and he felt like he wasn't comfortable with the amount of money he paid, and he tried to get his money back. Is that right?
Yes, sir.
Okay. He ended up with a chain that he acknowledged belonged to Mr. Waters. Is that right?
Yes.
And Mr. Waters never refunded any of the money. Is that right?
Not that I recall, no.
Okay, so Mr. Waters still has the money for even though you don't know how much it is, Mr. Waters still has the money for the rental of the room. Is that right?
I believe so.
The sharing of the room. Did my client tell you how the chain ended up in his pocket? Did he tell you he took the chain?
he stated he took the chain off of the kitchen counter and kept it and told Mr. Waters that he can have it back once he has the money back.
Okay, so basically he took the chain hostage in order to try to get his money back from being in the room.
Yes.
I got it. Okay, no further questions. Thank you, Judge.
No questions from the state. I'd ask the officer to be released and no further.
Judge, I don't have any witnesses, only argument.
I'm sorry, no wonder you couldn't hear me. Officer Montgomery, you are excused. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Mr. Lewis, you may proceed with your argument, sir.
Judge, respectfully, I'm going to ask that the case be bound over as a misdemeanor theft because I suspect that's what it is. Sometimes my children say that I get real persnippety about foolishness, and that's sort of what this is. I'm thankful that the court is sort of taking this sort of craziness seriously between these two folks. My guy's homeless, the other guy's probably like half a step or half a breath from being homeless, collecting money, and I want my money back, and we don't know how much money was given. We don't know if it's a reasonable price, an unreasonable price. Don't quite know what's going on, but I suspect it's probably closer to my client's version since the officer initially told you that Mr. Waters says he got stabbed in the neck. Mr. Waters never got stabbed in the neck because the officer says after he's questioned some more about what the officer sees, he doesn't see anything that would resemble a stabbing. There's no blood inside. My client admits that the chain, the client doesn't say it's my chain. The client tells you it's Mr. Waters' chain. I took Mr. Waters' chain in order to try to get my money back. That's a misdemeanor theft at best and a misdemeanor battery, however you might slice it up. There's no witnesses to anybody chasing anybody. There's no knife being brandished to take off the chain. So that would have been an armed robbery, and I don't even think it's a robbery. I think it's a misdemeanor theft and a misdemeanor battery. And that's my argument. That's what it should be bound over as.
Thank you, Mr. Lewis. I do believe the evidence. I'm sorry, go ahead. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Oh, I'm sorry. Judge, we ask that both charges be bound over, that there is probable cause. This meets the absolute definition of robbery under OCGA 16-8-40-B, regardless of the fact that they were homeless and regardless of the value or near homeless of the chain. It is taking property of another from their person by the use of force with the yanking. And they were roommates at the time, living together, same household. So we'd ask you to bind these charges over.
Thank you. I do find that the evidence is sufficient for probable cause. I will bind over both warrants as charged. Warrant number 20 W1431. W, did I say W? 20 W14310, the robbery, and warrant number 20 W14311, the family violence battery. Would you like to be heard, Mr. Bond?
Judge, respectfully, I believe that my client has a probation hold. So I'm going to ask the prosecutor before I spend 20 minutes with bond issues, if he's aware that he has a probation hold.
Yes, he is on probation. I actually pled him out in 2018 to felony terroristic threats. This was the thing where he destroyed a McDonald's bathroom. So he is on probation in that fast track number in Division 8.
Okay, so what I'm going to do, Judge, I'm not going to tie up the court with bond here since he won't be able to bond out anyway. I'll deal with bond over in Superior Court. I'll get with the prosecutor to find out if we can wrap everything together at some point in time, even before we go into Superior Court for bond hearing. So I'll deal with the Superior Court, Judge. Thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you, sir.